Being baptized by John in the Jordan River, the heavens opened. The Holy Spirit descended upon him like a dove, and a voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Immediately after, Jesus went into the wilderness, where he spent 40 days being tempted, but he did not give in. It was now time to begin his public ministry and reveal his divine power through signs and wonders that defied explanation. These first miracles weren't just displays of supernatural ability, they were evidence of his identity and mission. Let's now follow all the miracles of Jesus in a single video. In John chapter 2, verses 1 to 11, we read about Jesus' first miracle. It took place in a small village called Cana in Galilee during a wedding celebration. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. These celebrations could last for several days, and the whole community would usually take part. During the festivities, something disastrous happened. The wine ran out. For the hosts, this wasn't just a minor inconvenience. In that culture, it meant deep shame and embarrassment for the newlyweds and their families. Mary, the mother of Jesus, noticed the problem and went directly to him. "They have no more wine." She didn't explicitly ask for a miracle, but she knew Jesus could handle the situation. Jesus replied, "Woman, what does that have to do with you and me? My hour has not yet come." Mary simply told the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." She had complete confidence that Jesus would take care of it, even though he hadn't promised to do anything. Nearby stood 6 large stone jars. Jesus told the servants, "Fill the jars with water." Each jar could hold between 80 and 120 liters, and they filled them to the brim, over 500 liters in total. Then Jesus said, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." The servants did as they were told, and when the banquet master tasted the liquid, he was stunned. The water had turned into wine. And not just any wine, it was of the highest quality. The banquet master didn't even know where it had come from. He called the groom and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." John ends the passage by saying, "This was the first of the signs through which Jesus revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him." This miracle marked the official beginning of his public ministry, and the disciples saw it and believed he was no ordinary man. The second miracle of Jesus is recorded in John chapter 4, verses 46 to 54. Jesus returned to Cana in Galilee, where he had turned water into wine, but this time he wasn't met with celebration. He was met by a desperate father. There was a certain royal official whose son lay sick at Capernaum. This man was likely a government officer under Herod Antipas. His son was gravely ill, on the verge of death in Capernaum, about 30 kilometers from Cana. When the official heard that Jesus had arrived in Galilee from Judea, he immediately went to find him. After the long journey to Cana, he begged Jesus to come and heal his son, who was dying. Jesus responded with something that might sound strange at first. "Unless you people see signs and wonders, you will never believe." It wasn't a direct rebuke to the man, but a comment on how many people only believed after witnessing miracles. The official, however, wasn't interested in theology. His child was dying. "Sir, come down before my child dies," he pleaded, showing just how urgent the situation was. Instead of traveling back with him, Jesus simply said, "Go, your son will live." No dramatic ceremony, no laying on of hands. Jesus didn't even see the boy. He just spoke a few words from afar, and that was enough. The passage says, "The man took Jesus at his word and departed." This official showed remarkable faith. With nothing more than Jesus' promise, he turned and began the long journey home, without insisting Jesus come along. The next day, while he was still on his way, his servants met him with wonderful news. "Your son is alive." Naturally, he asked them what time the boy had begun to recover. They answered, Yesterday, at 1 in the afternoon, the fever left him. The father realized that this was the exact moment when Jesus had said, "Your son will live." It wasn't a coincidence, it was a miracle. The Bible concludes by saying that he and his whole household believed. Not just the official, but his entire family and staff became followers of Jesus because of this powerful miracle. The third miracle of Jesus is found in Luke chapter 5, verses 1 to 11. This miracle not only revealed Jesus' power over nature, but also led a few ordinary men to make the radical decision to leave everything behind and follow him. Jesus was standing by the Lake of Gennesaret, also known as the Sea of Galilee. So many people crowded around him to hear the word of God that he needed more space. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats, left there by fishermen who were washing their nets. These fishermen had worked all night without success and were now cleaning their nets to store them until the next outing. Jesus got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, also called Peter, and asked him to push out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. He used the boat as a natural platform, and the water helped project his voice to the crowd on the shore. When he finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." This request challenged all of Peter's professional experience as a fisherman. He knew that the best time to fish was during the night, not in the middle of the day. On top of that, deep waters weren't the ideal spot for the type of fish they usually caught. Simon answered sincerely, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets." Even though he doubted the outcome, Peter trusted Jesus' instruction. What happened next was simply unbelievable, even for seasoned fishermen. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. The fish appeared all at once, and in such abundance that the nets, designed to handle a solid load, began to tear under the weight. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. The catch was so extraordinary they needed 2 boats, and even then both were so overloaded that they started to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." The sheer magnitude of the miracle made Peter realize he was in the presence of someone extraordinary, someone with divine power. His natural reaction was to feel his own unworthiness in light of such greatness. For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. All of them, professional fishermen who knew the lake like the back of their hands, were absolutely stunned. They knew what had just happened could not be explained by any natural means. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on you will fish for people." With those words, Jesus announced a complete transformation in Peter's life. From fishing for fish, he would become a fisher of people, bringing them into the kingdom of God. The fourth miracle of Jesus is recorded in Mark 1:21-28 and Luke 4:33-37. This miracle revealed Jesus' authority over evil spiritual forces, and it took place in a place of worship during a religious service. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. Capernaum was a major town in Galilee, located near the sea, and it would later become a central base for Jesus' ministry. It was the Sabbath, the Jewish day of rest and worship, and Jesus took part in the synagogue service. The people were amazed at his teaching, because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. Unlike the religious teachers of the time, Jesus didn't cite other rabbis as sources of authority. He spoke with his own authority, offering fresh insight into the scriptures. Suddenly, something disturbing occurred. Just then a man in their synagogue who was possessed by an impure spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." The presence of Jesus instantly exposed the presence of evil. The impure spirit, through the possessed man, identified Jesus not only by name, but also by his divine title, the Holy One of God. The demons recognized Jesus' true identity, even when many people did not. Jesus responded with absolute authority. "Be quiet. Come out of him." There was no elaborate ritual, no lengthy prayer, no struggle, just a direct and powerful command. The result was immediate. The impure spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. The people's reaction was one of complete astonishment. The people were all so amazed that they asked each other, "What is this?" A new teaching, and with authority. He even gives orders to impure spirits, and they obey him. They had never seen anything like it. The exorcists of the time relied on complex rituals and magical formulas, often without success. Jesus, with just a word, cast out the demon instantly. News about him spread quickly over the whole region of Galilee. This public miracle, witnessed by many in a religious setting, caused Jesus' fame to spread rapidly. People from all over the region began to seek him out, bringing their sick and afflicted. The fifth miracle of Jesus is described in Matthew 8:14-15, Mark 1:29-31, and Luke 4:38-39. This miracle shows Jesus healing someone in a family setting, right after the dramatic scene in the synagogue. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. After the synagogue service where Jesus had cast out the demon, he went with his disciples to Peter's home, likely for a Sabbath meal. It seems Peter was married, and his mother-in-law lived with them. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. The family was clearly concerned about her condition. At that time, without antibiotics or modern medicine, a high fever could be extremely dangerous, even fatal. It was serious enough that they brought it to Jesus' attention as soon as he arrived. Jesus didn't hesitate, so he went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. In Mark's account, the text simply says, he helped her up. Luke, being a physician, adds more detail. He bent over her and rebuked the fever. The miracle was immediate and complete. There was no recovery period, as is normally expected even when a fever breaks. With medicine, the woman was so thoroughly healed that she got up and started serving the guests. This shows that Jesus didn't just remove the symptoms, he completely restored her strength and vitality. Though this fifth miracle may seem less dramatic than the previous ones, it reveals several important things about Jesus. He cared about ordinary, everyday problems, not just dramatic situations. He had power over physical illnesses, not just demons. He healed in different ways, sometimes with words, sometimes with touch. His healings were always complete and instantaneous. The news of this healing, along with the exorcism in the synagogue, quickly spread throughout the town. Mark reports that at sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and he healed many who had various diseases. Jesus' ministry was gaining momentum, and the crowds were beginning to seek him out for healing and deliverance. The sixth miracle of Jesus is recorded in Matthew 8:14, Mark 1:40-45, and Luke 5:12-16. This miracle broke through one of the strongest social and religious barriers of that time, contact with a leper. A man with leprosy came to Jesus and, falling on his knees, begged him, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Leprosy was one of the most feared diseases in the ancient world. The term could refer to a range of skin diseases, including what we now know as Hansen's disease. Lepers were considered unclean, both religiously and socially. They were forced to live in isolation outside the cities, far from their families and friends. When someone approached, they had to shout, "Unclean, unclean," to warn others to keep their distance. But this man, desperate for help, risked everything and came near to Jesus. Notice his request. "If you are willing, you can make me clean." He didn't question Jesus' power, only his willingness. Would he really want to touch someone as repulsive and impure as me? He must have wondered. Jesus' response was both shocking and revolutionary. Filled with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing." He said, "It be clean." Mark specifically mentions that Jesus was moved with compassion. Jesus didn't feel revulsion or fear, but deep compassion for this suffering man. What shocked the onlookers even more was that Jesus touched the leper. No one touched lepers. It went against all religious laws and social norms. Touching a leper made you ritually unclean. But Jesus flipped the logic. Instead of the leper's touch defiling Jesus, Jesus' touch made the leper clean. Immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. The healing was immediate and total. Damaged skin was restored, wounds closed up, deformities reversed. One moment, the man was covered with leprosy. The next, he was completely whole. Jesus then instructed him, "See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Jesus respected the law of Moses, which required a healed leper to be examined by a priest and to offer specific sacrifices before being declared officially clean and reintegrated into society. However, the man went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. The healing was so extraordinary that the man couldn't keep it to himself. His joy and gratitude were simply too overwhelming. As a result, the crowds grew even larger, so much so that Jesus could no longer go into towns without being mobbed by people seeking healing. Jesus returned to Capernaum after preaching throughout the towns of Galilee. In Matthew 9, Mark 2, and Luke 5, we find the remarkable story of Jesus' seventh miracle. When people heard that Jesus was home, so many gathered that there was no room left, not even at the door. The house was completely packed. Mark 2:2 says, "They gathered in such large numbers that there was no room left, not even outside the door, and he preached the word to them." Among the crowd were Pharisees and teachers of the law who had come from every village in Galilee, Judea, and Jerusalem. They were there watching Jesus closely. Luke 5:17 notes that the power of the Lord was with Jesus to heal the sick. While Jesus was teaching, 4 men arrived carrying a paralyzed man on a mat. This man couldn't walk. He was completely dependent on others. His friends were determined to get him to Jesus, believing he could be healed. But there was a problem. The house was so full they couldn't get through the door. Did they give up? Not at all. Mark 2:4 tells us, since they could not get him to Jesus because of the crowd, they made an opening in the roof above Jesus by digging through it, and then lowered the mat the man was lying on. Imagine the scene. They climbed up onto the flat roof of the house, dug through the thatch and mud, and lowered their friend right in front of Jesus. Roofs back then were made of wooden beams covered with branches and clay. It wasn't easy to break through, but these men were determined. When Jesus saw their faith, not just the paralyzed man's, but also his friends' bold and tireless faith, he did something unexpected. Instead of healing the man right away, he said, "Son, your sins are forgiven." The teachers of the law were outraged. Why does this fellow talk like that? He's blaspheming. Who can forgive sins but God alone? Jesus knew exactly what they were thinking. Mark 2:8-9 says, "Immediately Jesus knew in his spirit that this was what they were thinking in their hearts. And he said to them, 'Why are you thinking these things? Which is easier, to say to this paralyzed man, "Your sins are forgiven," or to say, "Get up, take your mat and walk"?' Then Jesus did what no one expected. He said, 'But I want you to know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins.' So he turned to the paralyzed man and said, 'I tell you, get up, take your mat and go home.' Immediately the man was healed. He stood up, picked up his mat, and walked out in front of everyone. The man who moments earlier couldn't move a finger was now walking perfectly." Mark 2:12 records the crowd's reaction. He got up, took his mat, and walked out in full view of them all. This amazed everyone, and they praised God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this." This miracle showed that Jesus had authority not just to heal bodies, but also to forgive sins, something only God could do. He used the visible physical healing as proof of his invisible spiritual authority. Jesus' eighth miracle is recorded in Matthew chapter 8 and Luke chapter 7. This story reveals Jesus' power to heal from a distance and his amazement at the faith of a foreigner. After Jesus had finished speaking to the people in Capernaum, a Roman centurion came to him for help. Centurions were Roman army officers in charge of 100 soldiers. Jews typically disliked the Romans as they were foreign occupiers ruling their land, but this centurion was different. Luke 7:4-5 tells us that the Jewish leaders spoke well of him. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this, because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." The centurion had a servant whom he deeply valued, but the servant was gravely ill, near death. Having heard of Jesus and his miracles, he sent some Jewish elders to ask Jesus to come and heal the servant. Jesus went with them, but as he neared the house, the centurion sent friends to deliver a message. "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed." What an incredible declaration. The centurion continued, "For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, 'Go,' and he goes, and that one, 'Come,' and he comes. I say to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." The centurion completely understood how authority works. As a military officer, his commands were obeyed. Likewise, he recognized that Jesus had authority over illness and could simply command it to leave, without needing to be physically present. Luke 7:9 says, "When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him, and turning to the crowd following him, he said, 'I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel.'" Jesus was amazed. A Roman soldier, a Gentile, had shown more faith than the people of Israel themselves. Jesus didn't need to enter the centurion's house. His word alone was enough, and so it happened. Matthew 8:13 records, "Then Jesus said to the centurion, 'Go, let it be done, just as you believed it would.' And his servant was healed at that moment. When the messengers returned to the centurion's home, they found the servant completely healed. Jesus had performed a miracle at a distance, without even seeing the sick servant, simply because of the centurion's great faith. Jesus' ninth miracle is described only in Luke 7:11-17. It is one of his most touching miracles, demonstrating his power even over death. Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. Nain was a small town about 40 kilometers, 25 miles, from Capernaum. Jesus and his followers had traveled a good distance to get there. Luke 7:12 says, "As he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. and a large crowd from the town was with her. It was a meeting of two processions, one following Jesus, full of life and hope, the other following a corpse, full of sorrow and mourning. The woman's situation was heartbreaking. She had already lost her husband, and now her only son had died. In that society, without a husband or son to support her, her future looked bleak. She would likely face poverty, with no one to care for her in old age. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." Jesus was moved by her pain. He felt her sorrow deeply. Then he went up and touched the bier they were carrying him on, and the bearers stood still. What Jesus did was shocking. Touching a bier, a kind of stretcher for carrying the dead, made a person ritually unclean according to Jewish law. Interrupting a funeral procession was bold and unexpected. Then Jesus said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." He spoke directly to the dead man, as if he could hear. And he did. The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. Imagine the scene. A young man, moments from burial, suddenly sits up and starts speaking, and Jesus tenderly hands him back to his mother, turning her grief into unspeakable joy. The crowd reacted with awe and praise. Luke 7:16-17 says, "They were all filled with awe and praised God. A great prophet has appeared among us," they said. "God has come to help his people." This news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country. This miracle was different from the others. Jesus wasn't asked to help. No one approached him. He simply encountered a moment of deep need and acted out of compassion. And for the first time, he raised someone from the dead, demonstrating his complete authority over death. Jesus' 10th miracle is recorded in Matthew 12, Mark 3, and Luke 6. It shows Jesus challenging rigid interpretations of the law in order to bring healing and restoration. On another Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. The Sabbath was the Jewish sacred day of rest. According to the religious leaders' interpretations, doing any kind of work, including healing, was forbidden on the Sabbath, unless it was a matter of life and death. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law were closely watching Jesus, hoping he would do something they could use against him. Luke 6:7 says, "The Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath." Jesus knew exactly what they were thinking, so he said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up and come here to the front." The man stood up and faced everyone. Then Jesus asked the Pharisees a crucial question: which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? In Mark 3:4, we read that they remained silent. They had no answer to such a direct question. Then Jesus looked around at them all and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Just imagine the scene. A man trying to stretch out a hand he likely hadn't been able to move in years, and right there, in front of everyone, it became completely normal. His fingers extended, the muscles regained strength, the skin returned to its natural color. It was an instant, complete transformation. The reaction of the Pharisees and teachers of the law was astonishing. Instead of rejoicing over the man's healing, they became furious. Luke 6:11 says, "But they were furious and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus." Mark 3:6 is even more direct. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. The Herodians were a political group that supported King Herod. Normally, the Pharisees and the Herodians were enemies, but their hatred for Jesus united them. This miracle was a turning point in Jesus' ministry. By healing on the Sabbath, he showed that the law was made to benefit people, not to prevent compassion and healing. He valued the restoration of a person over rigid rules that had lost their original purpose. The 11th miracle of Jesus is recorded in Matthew chapter 8, Mark chapter 4 and Luke chapter 8. This remarkable story reveals Jesus' power over the forces of nature. After a long day of teaching crowds by the Sea of Galilee, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." He was tired and wanted some time away from the crowds, so they left the crowd and, just as he was, in the boat, they took Jesus across the lake. The boats went with them. The Sea of Galilee, actually a large freshwater lake, is known for its sudden and violent storms caused by winds that rush down from the surrounding mountains. And sure enough, during the crossing, that's exactly what happened. Mark 4:37 describes it. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. The situation was dire. Even the disciples, some of whom were experienced fishermen, were terrified. The boat was almost sinking under the force of the waves crashing into it. And where was Jesus during all this? Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. He was so exhausted from the intense work of ministering to the crowds that he slept deeply, even through a violent storm. The disciples, in desperation, woke him up. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" they cried. In Matthew's account, they say, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." They couldn't understand how Jesus could be sleeping while everyone was in danger. He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. Jesus didn't just calm the wind. He spoke directly to the elements as if they were conscious beings who could obey his commands. And they did. The change was immediate and dramatic. From a violent storm to perfect calm in a matter of seconds. It wasn't gradual, it was instant. After calming the storm, Jesus turned to his disciples and asked, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" The disciples were amazed and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Even after seeing Jesus heal diseases and cast out demons, they still hadn't fully understood who he was. This miracle revealed a new level of authority, power over nature itself. To the Jews, only God had the power to control the sea and the storms. Psalm 89:9 says, "You rule over the surging sea. When its waves mount up, you still them." By calming the storm, Jesus demonstrated that he held the same power the scriptures attribute to God. The 12th miracle is one of the most dramatic stories in Jesus' ministry. It's recorded in Matthew chapter 8, Mark chapter 5, and Luke chapter 8. After calming the storm, Jesus and his disciples arrived in the region of the Gadarenes, also known as the Gerasenes, on the opposite shore of the Sea of Galilee. This was Gentile territory, not Jewish. As soon as Jesus stepped ashore, a man possessed by evil spirits came to meet him. This man's condition was truly horrifying. Mark 5:25 describes, "When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. Imagine the scene. A man living among tombs, naked, screaming, injuring himself with supernatural strength that could break iron chains. He was living in complete misery, cut off from all human society. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees before him. In a loud voice he shouted, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." Even the demons recognized who Jesus really was. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." A Roman legion was made up of about 6,000 soldiers. This indicated that a multitude of demons were tormenting that man. The demons begged Jesus not to send them out of that region. Nearby, a large herd of pigs was grazing on the hillside. The demons pleaded with Jesus, "Send us into the pigs, so we may enter them." Jesus gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out of the man and entered the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 pigs, rushed down the steep bank, plunged into the lake, and drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported what had happened in the town and countryside. People came out to see for themselves. When they reached Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. The transformation was complete and astonishing. The man who had once been naked, out of control, violent and living among the dead, was now calm, clothed and clear-minded, sitting at Jesus' feet. A total transformation. But the people of that region were more concerned about the loss of the pigs than the healing of the man. They began to plead with Jesus to leave their territory. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed begged to go with him. But Jesus did not let him. Instead, he said, "Go home to your family and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." Luke 8:39 adds that Jesus said, "Return home and tell how much God has done for you." So the man went away and began to tell throughout the town how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed. This miracle showed Jesus' absolute power over evil forces, even when they were many. It also revealed his desire to bring deliverance to people outside the Jewish community, people considered unclean by religious standards. Jesus was always surrounded by people in need of his help. Some were powerful and influential. Others were poor and forgotten by society. The 13th miracle shows how Jesus treated everyone with equal care and attention. In Matthew chapter 9, Mark chapter 5, and Luke chapter 8, we find the story of a woman who had been suffering from bleeding for 12 years. Mark 5:25-26 describes her pain clearly. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. 12 years. Just imagine how long that is. During all that time, she couldn't live a normal life. According to Jewish law, a woman with bleeding was considered unclean. She wasn't allowed to touch anyone or be touched. She couldn't worship at the temple. Anything she touched became unclean. She lived in complete social isolation. And that wasn't all. The Bible says she had spent all her money on doctors, but instead of improving, her condition got worse. She was left hopeless, penniless, and without prospects for healing. Then she heard about Jesus. Word of his miracles was spreading everywhere. Luke 8:43-44 says, "And a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her, came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped." Look how she approached quietly from behind, hidden in the crowd. She didn't want to be noticed. Why? Because legally she shouldn't have been there. Her touch would make others ritually unclean. And after so many years of rejection, she probably felt deeply ashamed. She didn't even ask Jesus to touch her or speak to her. Her thought was, if I just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. What incredible faith. She believed that even the slightest contact with Jesus would be enough, and it was. The moment her fingers touched the edge of his cloak, something extraordinary happened. Mark 5:29 says, "Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering." But the story doesn't end there. Jesus knew that someone had touched him in a different way. It wasn't just a bump in the crowd. Mark 5:30 records, "At once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, 'Who touched my clothes?' The disciples found the question odd. After all, the crowd was pressing in on every side. Luke 8:45 shows their reaction. Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." But Jesus insisted, "Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me." He knew healing power had flowed from him, and he wanted to find the person who had received it. Realizing she couldn't stay hidden, the woman came trembling and fell at Jesus' feet. In front of everyone, she explained why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. That must have been a terrifying moment for her, to reveal all of that in public, but Jesus' response was beautiful. Mark 5:34 says, "He said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering.'" Jesus didn't scold her for touching him or being in the crowd while considered unclean. Instead, he called her daughter, a word full of kindness and acceptance. He confirmed publicly that she was healed and sent her away in peace. After 12 long years of isolation and shame, this woman wasn't just healed physically, she was also restored socially. Jesus made a point of making her healing public so that everyone would know she was now clean and could return to a normal life in the community. The 14th miracle is directly connected to the previous one, as it happened on the same occasion. This story is recorded in Matthew chapter 9, Mark chapter 5, and Luke chapter 8. While Jesus was still speaking with the woman who had been healed from her bleeding, something urgent happened. Mark 5:21-22 says, "When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders, named Jairus, came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet." Jairus was an important figure in the community. As a synagogue leader, he was responsible for organizing religious services and overseeing the activities. He was respected and likely quite wealthy. But at that moment, neither his position nor his wealth could solve his most serious problem. Mark 5:23 continues, "He pleaded earnestly with him. 'My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live.' His little girl, just 12 years old, was dying. Jesus was moved by the desperate plea of this father and began to go with him. But as we've seen, on the way there, the miracle of the woman with the issue of blood took place, causing a delay. While Jesus was still speaking with the woman, some people came from Jairus' house with devastating news. Mark 5:35 records, "While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. 'Your daughter is dead,' they said. 'Why bother the teacher anymore?' What a terrible moment for Jairus. His last hope seemed lost. If only Jesus had arrived earlier, maybe he could have healed her. But now, it was too late. Or was it? Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." In the middle of that despair, Jesus offered hope. He asked Jairus to keep believing, even when everything seemed lost. Jesus continued on to Jairus' house, but he didn't let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John. When they arrived, they encountered a typical scene of mourning for that culture, people weeping loudly and wailing. Mark 5:38-39 describes, "When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, 'Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep.' The people laughed at him. They knew the girl was truly dead, not just sleeping. But Jesus was speaking metaphorically. For him, death wasn't the end, but a temporary sleep from which he could wake her up. Jesus sent everyone out and took only the girl's parents and his 3 disciples into the room where she lay. Mark 5:41-42 tells what happened next. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha koum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. Talitha cum. These words were spoken in Aramaic, the everyday language Jesus used. Mark preserves both the original words and their translation, capturing the moment exactly as it happened. The miracle was instant and complete. The girl didn't just come back to life. She stood up and walked, showing that her restoration was perfect. She wasn't weak or dazed, but fully well. Then Jesus gave a practical instruction. He told them to give her something to eat. This detail shows both Jesus' care for basic needs and further confirms that the girl was truly alive and well, able to eat and drink. Jesus also instructed the parents not to tell anyone what had happened. Most likely, he didn't want to attract even more attention as a miracle worker, since his mission was far deeper than just performing signs and wonders. The 15th miracle is recorded in Matthew 9:27-31. This story shows how Jesus responded to persistent faith. As Jesus went on from there, 2 blind men followed him, calling out, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." These men were physically blind, but they had spiritual clarity. They called Jesus Son of David, a messianic title. Even though they couldn't see with their eyes, they recognized who Jesus truly was, the promised Messiah. The 2 men kept following Jesus, continuing to cry out for help. They didn't give up easily, even when it seemed like Jesus wasn't responding right away. Their persistence showed determination and faith. When he had gone indoors, the blind men came to him and he asked them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" "Yes, Lord," they replied. Jesus didn't heal them immediately. First, he tested their faith with a direct question. Their answer was simple and full of confidence. "Yes, Lord." They truly believed that Jesus had the power to restore their sight. Then he touched their eyes and said, "According to your faith, let it be done to you." And their sight was restored. Jesus directly connected their healing to their faith. He didn't use mud or ask them to wash somewhere as in other healings. He simply touched their eyes and declared that they would receive what they believed for. And their eyes were opened, just like that. In a moment, these men who had lived in darkness began to see. Imagine the impact of that moment, seeing colors, shapes, faces, perhaps for the first time. The joy must have been overwhelming. Jesus then gave them a specific instruction. Jesus warned them sternly, "See that no one knows about this." Why didn't he want the news to spread? Likely because he didn't want to be known merely as a miracle worker. His mission was much deeper. Also, the more his fame spread, the more difficult his ministry became, due to the crowds and the attention of the authorities. But the joy of the formerly blind men was too much to contain. But they went out and spread the news about him all over that region. They just couldn't keep their miraculous healing to themselves. They told everyone what Jesus had done for them, spreading his fame throughout the land. The 16th miracle is recorded in Matthew 9:32-33. It's a brief but powerful story that highlights the contrast between the common people's response and the religious leaders' reaction to Jesus' miracles. While they were going out, a man who was demon-possessed and could not talk was brought to Jesus. Right after the 2 formerly blind men left, another case was brought to Jesus. A man who couldn't speak due to demonic possession. In other possession stories we've seen, the symptoms included seizures, violent behavior, or screaming. But this case was different. The main symptom was the inability to speak. The man was mute, not due to a physical cause, but a spiritual. A demon was preventing him from speaking, and when the demon was driven out, the mute man spoke. And the crowd was amazed and said, "Nothing like this has ever been seen in Israel." Jesus didn't hesitate. He cast out the demon, and the man immediately began to speak. There was no recovery period, no therapy. The moment the demon left, he fully regained his ability to speak. The crowd's reaction was one of amazement and wonder. Nothing like this has ever been seen in Israel. That exclamation shows that, even in a country with a rich history of prophets and miracles, what Jesus was doing was unprecedented. The quantity, the variety, and the completeness of his healings and deliverances were extraordinary. But not everyone responded with admiration. Matthew 9:34 continues, "But the Pharisees said, 'He drives out demons by the prince of demons.'" Instead of acknowledging God's power at work through Jesus, the religious leaders attributed his miracles to Satan. It was a ridiculous and contradictory accusation. Why would the prince of demons cast out his own demons? This brief story highlights both Jesus' authority over evil spiritual forces and the contrast between the simple faith of the common people and the blind resistance of the religious leaders. Ordinary people saw the miracles and marveled, while the Pharisees, trapped by their prejudice and jealousy, clung to any explanation, no matter how absurd, to deny Jesus' divine power. The 17th miracle is one of Jesus' most well-known and one of the few recorded in all four Gospels: Matthew chapter 14, Mark chapter 6, Luke chapter 9, and John chapter 6. Jesus was looking for a quiet place to rest with his disciples after hearing about the death of John the Baptist. Mark 6:31-32 says, "And he said to them, 'Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest.' For many people were coming and going, and they did not even have a chance to eat. So they went away by boat to a solitary place. But the crowds figured out where they were going and followed on foot. When Jesus landed and saw the large crowd, he wasn't annoyed by the interruption to his rest. Quite the opposite. Mark 6:34 records, "When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things." Jesus spent the whole day teaching and healing the sick. By evening, the disciples began to worry. They were in a remote place, far from any town, and all those people would need something to eat. The disciples offered a practical solution: send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. It made sense. People could reach nearby towns before dark and find something to eat. But Jesus had a different plan. They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. The disciples were stunned. How could they possibly feed so many people? John 6:7 records Philip's response. It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. A denarius was about a day's wage, so 200 denarii meant nearly a whole year's salary. Then Jesus asked, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." After checking, Andrew replied, "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many?" The loaves were likely flat and small, and the fish probably no bigger than sardines. Just a humble lunch, clearly not enough for a crowd. Jesus then gave specific instructions. Have the people sit down. John notes that there was plenty of grass, making it comfortable to sit. Mark adds an interesting detail. Jesus told them to sit in groups of 50 and 100. This created order and made distributing the food much easier. Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, looked up to heaven, gave thanks, broke the loaves, and began handing them to the disciples to distribute to the crowd. He did the same with the fish. The miracle didn't happen all at once. It seems the food multiplied as Jesus broke it. The disciples would take what he handed them, give it out, return, and find more waiting. It just kept coming. And the result? Matthew 14:20-21 records, "They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over." The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men. Besides women and children, everyone ate until they were full. This wasn't a snack, it was a full meal that left no one hungry. Even more incredible was the amount of leftovers, 12 full baskets, more than the food they had to begin with. And the crowd was massive, around 5,000 men, plus women and children. Including everyone, the total could easily have exceeded 10,000 people. The 18th miracle is recorded in Matthew 14, Mark 6, and John 6. This extraordinary event took place right after the feeding of the 5,000. After feeding the crowd, Jesus insisted his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side of the sea while he dismissed the crowd. Matthew 14:22-23 says, "Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone." Jesus wanted time alone to pray. He had just received news of John the Baptist's death and needed time to process the loss. Also, as John's Gospel tells us, he knew the crowd, amazed by the miracle of the loaves and fish, wanted to make him king by force. Jesus needed a moment away from the pressures and expectations of the people. Meanwhile, the disciples were struggling at sea. Matthew 14:24 says, "And the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it." Mark adds that Jesus saw them straining at the oars because the wind was against them. It was already the fourth watch of the night, between 3 and 6 a.m. The disciples had spent nearly the entire night battling the wind and waves, making little progress. Then something incredible happened. Matthew 14:25-26 records, "During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. 'It's a ghost,' they said, and cried out in fear." Imagine the scene. In the middle of the darkness, with a rough sea all around, the disciples suddenly see a figure walking toward them on the water. It was so unthinkable, they assumed it had to be a ghost. Their fear was completely understandable, but Jesus quickly calmed them. "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." It was truly Jesus, their master, doing something that defied all laws of nature, walking on water as if it was solid ground. Peter, ever impulsive, had a unique reaction. Matthew 14:28 says, "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." That was a bold request. Peter wanted to experience the same miraculous power Jesus was displaying. Jesus simply said, "Come," and Peter stepped out of the boat and began to walk on the water toward Jesus. For a few moments, Peter actually walked on the sea. It was a miracle within a miracle. But then something changed. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and, beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Peter took his eyes off Jesus and started focusing on the storm around him. His fear grew, his faith weakened, and he began to sink. Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" Jesus didn't let Peter drown. He reached out at once and pulled him up, saving him from the very danger Peter had asked to face. When the two of them got into the boat, the wind died down. The disciples were in awe and worshipped Jesus, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." This confession shows they were finally starting to grasp who Jesus really was. John adds an interesting detail. When Jesus got into the boat, they immediately reached the shore where they were headed. It seems there was a third miracle in this story, a sudden arrival at their destination. This miracle demonstrated Jesus' power over the laws of nature. Walking on water was something that, in Jewish tradition, only God could do. As Job 9:8 says, "God is the one who alone stretches out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea." By doing this, Jesus was revealing his divine nature in a way the disciples could no longer ignore. The 19th miracle of Jesus shows how he began expanding his ministry beyond the borders of Israel. In Matthew 15 and Mark 7, we find the story of how he helped a non-Jewish woman and her daughter. Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon, says Matthew 15:21. This was a foreign area, home to the Canaanites, people whom the Jews considered impure and pagan. Mark adds that Jesus entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, yet he could not keep his presence secret. Even while trying to stay hidden, a Canaanite woman heard he was in the region and came looking for him. She was desperate. Her daughter was suffering terribly, possessed by a demon. She had heard of Jesus' miracles and believed he could help. "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me," she cried. "My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly." She used a messianic title, Son of David, showing that even as a foreigner, she recognized Jesus as the Messiah promised to Israel. But then Jesus did something surprising. Matthew 15:23 says, Jesus did not answer a word. He simply ignored her. This seems odd to us, knowing Jesus as compassionate and loving. But he had a purpose. The disciples were bothered by her persistent cries and said, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." They wanted Jesus to either help her quickly or get rid of her. Jesus then explained, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." He was stating his primary mission, first to the Jews, God's chosen people. But the woman didn't give up. She came closer, knelt before him, and pleaded, "Lord, help me." Jesus responded with words that seem harsh. "It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." At that time, Jews sometimes referred to Gentiles as dogs, a derogatory term. But notice, Jesus used the diminutive form little dogs, softening the phrase. The woman's reply showed amazing humility and faith. She said, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." She wasn't offended by the comparison. Instead, she accepted it and used it to strengthen her request. It was as if she said, "Even if I'm not one of the chosen people, please let me have just a bit of your mercy." Jesus was moved by her response. "Woman, you have great faith," he exclaimed. "Your request is granted." And at that very moment, her daughter was healed. Mark 7:30 adds a beautiful detail. She went home and found her child lying on the bed and the demon gone. Jesus healed the girl from a distance without even seeing her. His power wasn't limited by physical presence. The 20th miracle of Jesus also took place in non-Jewish territory. In Mark 7:31-37, we read how Jesus healed a man who was deaf and could hardly speak. Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon down to the Sea of Galilee and into the region of the Decapolis, Mark 7:31 says. The Decapolis, which means 10 cities, was a region east and southeast of the Sea of Galilee, mostly inhabited by Gentiles. Jesus was clearly expanding his ministry beyond Israel's borders. In the Decapolis, some people brought Jesus a man who had two challenges. He was deaf and could barely talk. His friends begged Jesus to place his hand on him. Notice the care and concern they showed for their disabled friend. They personally brought him to Jesus, seeking help. Jesus did something very intentional in this case. First, Jesus took him aside, away from the crowd. Instead of performing the miracle in front of everyone, Jesus wanted a private moment with this man. This reveals his sensitivity. He didn't treat the man as a public spectacle, but with personal dignity. Next, Jesus used a very physical and visual approach. He put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue. Why did Jesus do that? Most likely because the man couldn't hear verbal instructions. Jesus used gestures the man could see and feel, communicating in a way he could understand. He touched the very parts affected, the ears that couldn't hear and the tongue that couldn't speak properly. Then Jesus looked up to heaven, gave a deep sigh, and said to him, "Ephphatha," which means be opened. This deep sigh shows Jesus' emotion, his compassion for human suffering. Ephphatha was spoken in Aramaic, the everyday language Jesus spoke, and Mark preserved the exact word Jesus used, along with its translation. The result was immediate and complete. At this, the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. It wasn't a gradual or partial improvement. It was an instant and perfect healing. The man who had never heard sounds could now hear perfectly, and not only that, he could speak clearly. Normally, people who've never heard have great difficulty speaking, since they can't hear the sounds they're trying to imitate. But Jesus didn't just heal the physical organs. He gave the man the ability to use them fully, right away. Jesus instructed them not to tell anyone, but the more he told them, the more they spread the news. People were completely amazed and said, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak." That last exclamation is especially significant because it echoes a prophecy from Isaiah 35, 5-6 about the Messianic age. "Then will the eyes of the blind be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then will the lame leap like a deer, and the mute tongue shout for joy." By fulfilling this prophecy, Jesus was showing that he was the promised Messiah of the Old Testament. The 21st miracle of Jesus also took place in a predominantly Gentile region. In Matthew 15, 32-39 and Mark 8, 1-10, we find the story of the second multiplication of loaves and fish performed by Jesus. During those days, another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, "I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way, because some of them have come a long distance." Note the deep compassion of Jesus. He cared not only about the spiritual needs of the people, but also their physical needs. These people had spent 3 days listening to his teachings, and their food supplies had run out. Many had come from far away and could faint on their way home if they traveled back hungry. The disciples responded, "Where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them?" It seems they had forgotten the earlier occasion when Jesus fed 5,000 people. Or maybe they thought that miracle was a one-time exception. Jesus asked, "How many loaves do you have?" "7," they replied, "and a few small fish." Compared to the first multiplication, 5 loaves and 2 fish for 5,000 men, they now had slightly more food, 7 loaves and a few fish for a smaller crowd, 4,000 men. Jesus followed the same pattern as before. First, he told the crowd to sit down on the ground. Then he took the 7 loaves and the fish, gave thanks, broke them, and gave them to the disciples, and they in turn to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. Once again, everyone ate until they were full. And again, more baskets were left over, 7, than the number of original loaves. Matthew 15:38 says, "The number of those who ate was 4,000 men, besides women and children." The crowd was slightly smaller than in the previous miracle. 5,000 men, but it was still massive. After the miracle, Jesus sent the crowd away, got into the boat and went to the region of Magadan, or Dalmanutha, as Mark refers to it. The 22nd miracle of Jesus is recorded in Mark 8:22-26. It's a unique miracle because it's the only recorded case where Jesus healed someone in 2 stages, not instantly. They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. Bethsaida was a town on the northeastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. As in many cases, we see people bringing someone in need to Jesus, showing both faith and compassion for the one suffering. Jesus didn't perform the miracle immediately in front of everyone. Instead, he took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. Jesus often sought privacy when performing miracles, avoiding turning them into public spectacles. The healing method was unusual. When he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" Jesus used his saliva, thought in ancient times to have healing properties, and the touch of his hands. Then he asked if the man could see anything, as if expecting some progress in the healing. The man's response was fascinating. "I see people. They look like trees walking around." He could see, but his vision was still blurry. People looked like walking trees to him. Then Jesus did something unprecedented in the Gospels. He performed a second stage of healing. Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. After healing the man, Jesus sent him home, saying, "Don't even go into the village." Jesus often instructed people not to spread news about his miracles, perhaps to prevent crowds from seeking him only for physical healing rather than for his spiritual teaching. This miracle is significant for several reasons. First, it is the only recorded instance in which Jesus healed someone in two stages rather than instantly. This shows that Jesus was not bound to a specific method or formula for healing. He adapted his approach to each individual's unique needs. Second, some scholars interpret this two-step healing as a metaphor for the disciples' gradual understanding of who Jesus truly was. Just as the man's vision was restored in stages, the disciples' spiritual insight was also developing over time. Third, this miracle took place in Bethsaida, a town where Jesus had already performed many miracles, yet its people as a whole had not repented or believed in him. In fact, in Matthew 11:21, Jesus pronounces a woe against Bethsaida for its unbelief. Perhaps this is why Jesus took the man out of the town and instructed him not to return there. Jesus' 23rd miracle is recorded in Matthew 17, Mark 9, and Luke 9. This extraordinary event is known as the Transfiguration, where Jesus' divine glory was visibly revealed to 3 of his disciples. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, with him and led them up a high mountain by themselves. Jesus often took these 3 disciples, his inner circle, with him for special moments. On this occasion, he led them to a high mountain, traditionally identified as either Mount Tabor or Mount Hermon. What happened next was astonishing. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. The Greek word for transfigured is metamorpho, from which we get the word metamorphosis. It implies a complete transformation in outward appearance that reveals one's true inner nature. For a brief moment, Jesus' divine glory, usually veiled by his humanity, became visible. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes turned dazzling white, whiter than any earthly bleach could make them, as Mark notes. But that wasn't all. Suddenly Moses and Elijah appeared before them, talking with Jesus. Moses represented the law, and Elijah represented the prophets, the 2 great divisions of the Old Testament. Their presence showed that Jesus was the fulfillment of both the law and the prophets. Luke 9:31 tells us what they discussed. They appeared in glorious splendor, speaking about Jesus' departure, which he was about to bring to fulfillment at Jerusalem. They were talking about his upcoming death, his sacrificial mission for humanity. Peter, ever impulsive, wanted to preserve the moment. "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He likely hoped to prolong this glorious experience, not fully grasping its purpose. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." The radiant cloud was the Shekinah, the visible manifestation of God's glory, just like what appeared in the Old Testament tabernacle and in temple. The voice was that of God the Father, confirming Jesus' unique identity as his beloved Son and commanding the disciples to listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. This extraordinary miracle was a brief unveiling of Jesus' true divine nature. For just a moment, the veil of humanity was lifted, and the disciples saw Jesus in his heavenly glory. This event deeply strengthened their faith and prepared them for the difficult events to come, namely Jesus' crucifixion and death. Moreover, the Transfiguration confirmed Jesus' identity as the promised Messiah, the fulfillment of both the law and the prophets, and the very Son of God. Jesus' 24th miracle is recorded in Matthew 17, Mark 9, and Luke 9. This story takes place shortly after the Transfiguration, when Jesus and the 3 disciples came down from the mountain. When they came to the crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. "Lord, have mercy on my son," he said. "He has seizures and is suffering greatly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him." The boy's condition was severe. Mark adds more detail. "Whenever the spirit seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid." These symptoms resemble epilepsy, but in this case, the root cause was spiritual, an evil spirit. Dutch's father was desperate. He had brought his son to Jesus' disciples, but they were unable to heal him. This occurred while Jesus, Peter, James, and John were on the mountain during the Transfiguration. Jesus' response was striking. "O unbelieving and perverse generation, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." Jesus expressed frustration at the lack of faith among both the disciples and the crowd. Mark records a touching exchange between Jesus and the boy's father. The man said, "If you can do anything, take pity on us and help us." Jesus replied, "If you can, everything is possible for one who believes." The father then cried out, "I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief." A heartfelt confession, recognizing both his faith and his doubts. Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed at that moment. Luke adds, "Even as the boy was coming, the demon threw him to the ground in a convulsion. But Jesus rebuked the impure spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father." Later, the disciples asked Jesus privately why they couldn't drive out the demon. He replied, "Because you have so little faith." Mark adds, "This kind can come out only by prayer and fasting." This miracle revealed several important truths. First, it demonstrated Jesus' absolute power over evil spirits, even those that were particularly difficult to cast out. Second, it emphasized the importance of faith in receiving God's power. Third, it taught that some spiritual challenges require deeper levels of prayer and dependence on God. After the healing, people were amazed at the greatness of God. Once again, the miracle showcased both Jesus' power and compassion and his authority over all forces of evil. The 25th miracle of Jesus shows how he met a practical need in a surprising way. In Matthew chapter 17, verses 24 to 27, we find the story of a tax that needed to be paid. When Jesus and his disciples arrived in Capernaum, the collectors of the temple tax approached Peter and asked, "Does your teacher pay the temple tax?" The temple tax was an annual fee paid by every adult Jewish male to help cover the expenses of the temple in Jerusalem. It was equivalent to about 2 days' wages for a common laborer. Peter quickly replied, "Yes, he does." He said this without consulting Jesus first, maybe to avoid any awkwardness or potential trouble. When Peter returned to the house where they were staying, Jesus brought up the topic before Peter even mentioned it. "What do you think, Simon?" Jesus asked. "From whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? From their own children or from others?" Peter answered, "From others." That was the right answer. Princes and the king's children were typically exempt from paying taxes. Then the children are exempt, Jesus said. What did he mean by that? Jesus was referring to himself as the Son of God. If the temple was God's house, then Jesus, as God's Son, shouldn't be obligated to pay the tax. He was revealing something about his true identity. However, Jesus didn't want to cause unnecessary offense or scandal, so he told Peter, "But so that we may not cause offense, go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch, open its mouth, and you will find a silver coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours." Just imagine that. Jesus asked Peter, an experienced fisherman, to do something very strange. He didn't say, "Go fish until you catch enough to cover the tax." He told him to catch just one specific fish, the first one, and claimed there would be an exact coin in its mouth to cover the tax for both of them. This miracle demonstrated Jesus' supernatural knowledge. How could he have known there'd be a coin in a fish's mouth? Humanly speaking, that would be impossible. It also showed his power over all creation. Somehow, Jesus arranged for a specific fish to swallow a specific coin and be the very first one Peter would catch. The entire natural order and circumstances themselves were under his control. But perhaps the most impressive part of this miracle is what it reveals about Jesus' heart. Even though he was the Son of God and fully entitled to be exempt from the temple tax, he chose to fulfill the obligation. He showed respect for earthly authorities and avoided unnecessary conflict. At the same time, he provided the means for the tax to be paid, so Peter wouldn't have to use his own limited resources. The 26th miracle is one of the most detailed healing stories in the Gospels. In John chapter 9, verses 1 to 41, we read about an encounter that transformed not only a man's physical eyes, but also his spiritual vision. As he went along, Jesus saw a man blind from birth. This was a severe case. The man had never seen sunlight, never looked into his parents' faces, never seen the colors of the world. He had lived in darkness his entire life. The disciples were curious about the cause of his condition. They asked, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" In Jewish culture at that time, many believed that sickness or disability was a punishment for sin. They wanted to know who was to blame, the man himself, perhaps for a future sin God foresaw, or his parents. Jesus corrected that thinking. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed. In him, Jesus didn't see the blindness as a punishment, but as an opportunity for God to show his power and love. It was a completely different perspective. "While I am in the world, I am the light of the world," Jesus said. He was about to prove that both literally and spiritually. What he did next was unusual. After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Why such a strange method? Maybe because the man was blind from birth. Jesus wanted him to feel the healing happening. Or perhaps to show that God can use simple, even odd materials, like mud made from spit, to accomplish miraculous things. Jesus then gave the man a clear command: "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam." The man had to take a step of faith and obedience. The pool of Siloam was a place used for ritual purification in Jerusalem, so the man went and washed and came home seeing. What an incredible moment. Imagine seeing for the first time in your life colors, shapes, faces, the sky, all at once. The miracle was instant and complete. He didn't need to learn how to see or go through any adjustment period. His eyes and brain worked perfectly from the start, but the story didn't end there. His neighbors and others who used to see him begging were shocked. "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" some asked. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But the man insisted, "I am the man." Naturally, they wanted to know what happened. He explained how Jesus made mud, put it on his eyes, and told him to wash in Siloam. So I went, washed, and now I can see. Where is this man? They asked. I don't know, he replied. At this point, the religious authorities stepped in. They brought the man who had been blind to the Pharisees. Verse 14 explains why. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. This was significant because, according to the strict Pharisaic interpretation of the Sabbath law, making mud and healing, unless it was a matter of life and death, were considered work and thus forbidden on the Sabbath. The Pharisees also asked the man how he had received his sight, and he repeated his simple story. This led to division among them. Some said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." Others argued, "How can a sinner perform such miraculous signs?" They couldn't reconcile the clear display of divine power with their interpretation of Sabbath law. So they turned to the man himself and asked, "What do you say about him?" "It was your eyes he opened." His answer was straightforward. He is a prophet, but the Jews still did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight. So they summoned the man's parents and asked, "Is this your son, the one you say was born blind? How is it that he can now see?" The parents were afraid. Verse 22 explains, his parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already decided that anyone who acknowledged Jesus as the Christ would be put out of the synagogue. Being expelled from the synagogue was a serious form of both social and religious excommunication. So the parents answered cautiously, "We know he is our son, and we know he was born blind. But how he can now see, or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He's of age, he will speak for himself." The authorities summoned the man a second time and demanded, "Give glory to God. We know this man is a sinner." The man replied with simple but powerful logic, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I do know, I was blind, and now I see." They kept pressing him about how Jesus had opened his eyes, and the man, growing impatient, responded, "I have told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" That set them off. They insulted him. "You are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this man, we don't even know where he comes from." The man's response was extraordinary. From someone likely with little formal education came a powerful theological defense. "Now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." Unable to refute his logic, the religious leaders resorted to intimidation. "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" And they threw him out. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found the man, he asked, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him," the man replied. Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped Jesus. Jesus ended with a profound reflection. "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Some Pharisees who were with him heard this and asked, "What? Are we blind too?" Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin, but now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains." This miracle revealed not only Jesus' power to heal physical blindness, but also to open spiritual eyes. The man progressed in his understanding of Jesus. He first called him the man called Jesus, then said he is a prophet, later argued he is from God, and ultimately worshipped him as Lord. Meanwhile, the religious leaders who claimed to clearly see spiritual truths remained blind to the truth standing right in front of them. The 27th miracle of Jesus is recorded in Luke chapter 13, verses 10 to 17. It's the story of a woman who had been bent over for 18 long years until an encounter with Jesus changed everything. On a Sabbath, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues. Jesus often taught in synagogues on the Sabbath, the sacred day of worship for the Jews. On this particular day, there was someone special in the congregation. A woman was there who had been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not straighten up at all. For 18 years, more than 6,500 days, this woman lived bent over, always looking down, unable to stand upright. Luke, being a doctor, specifically notes that the cause of her condition was a spirit of infirmity, suggesting a spiritual origin rather than merely a physical issue like arthritis or injury. Imagine what her life must have been like. For 18 years, she couldn't look up at the sky, couldn't look people in the eye while speaking, couldn't lie down comfortably, couldn't perform basic tasks that required standing up straight. That constant downward gaze likely affected even her mood and outlook on life. When Jesus saw her, he called her forward and said to her, "Woman, you are set free from your infirmity." Jesus took the initiative. The woman didn't ask for help, didn't cry out for attention like so many others. Perhaps she had grown resigned to her condition after so many years, but Jesus saw her, called her to the front of the synagogue before everyone, and declared her freedom. Then he put his hands on her, and immediately she straightened up and praised God. The effect was instant. After 18 years bent over, she stood up straight. No physical therapy, no adjustment period, no pain. And the very first thing she did with her new posture was praise God. What a moment of joy and gratitude that must have been. But not everyone shared her joy. The synagogue leader was indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath. He didn't confront Jesus directly, but spoke to the crowd. "There are 6 days for work. So come and be healed on those days, not on the Sabbath." This religious leader was so bound to the rules that he lost sight of their purpose. He viewed healing as work and therefore inappropriate for the Sabbath. He valued strict adherence to the letter of the law more than the restoration of a suffering human being. Jesus responded with irrefutable logic. "You hypocrites! Doesn't each of you untie your ox or donkey from the stall and lead it out to give it water on the Sabbath? Then shouldn't this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath day?" From what bound her? Jesus' argument was clear. If it's acceptable to care for an animal on the Sabbath, as the Pharisees themselves regularly did, how much more important it is to free a human being, a daughter of Abraham, a member of God's covenant people, from 18 years of suffering. Jesus also revealed the deeper nature of the woman's condition. She had been bound by Satan. Her affliction wasn't merely physical, it was the result of spiritual oppression. Jesus not only healed her body, he set her free spiritually. When he said this, all his opponents were humiliated, but the people were delighted with all the wonderful things he was doing. The religious leaders had no response to Jesus' logic. Their own actions condemned them. Meanwhile, ordinary people, those not shackled by rigid legalistic interpretations, could see and celebrate the powerful, liberating work of God in action. The 28th miracle of Jesus is recorded in Luke chapter 14, verses 1 to 6. This account, much like the story of the bent-over woman, also centers on a Sabbath healing and confronts religious leaders about the true meaning of the holy day. 1. Sabbath. When Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. Jesus had been invited to a meal at the home of a leading Pharisee. This wasn't just a casual get-together. The Pharisees were watching him closely, likely hoping to catch him in something they could use against him. In front of him was a man suffering from abnormal swelling of his body. The man had dropsy, or edema, a condition where fluid builds up in the body, causing swelling, often in the legs, ankles, and feet. It's painful, debilitating, and often a symptom of more serious heart, kidney, or liver issues. Interestingly, the man was positioned right in front of Jesus. This seems deliberate. Perhaps the Pharisees had placed him there as a test to see if Jesus would once again heal on the Sabbath. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in the law, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? Jesus, knowing their thoughts, went straight to the heart of the issue. He raised the question himself before even healing the man, but they remained silent. They didn't want to commit. If they said yes, they couldn't criticize him. If they said no, they'd come across as heartless in front of everyone. Seeing their silence, Jesus took hold of the man, healed him, and sent him on his way. There was no hesitation, no ceremony. Jesus simply touched the man, healed him, and let him go. The healing was immediate and complete. The swelling vanished, and the man was restored. Afterward, Jesus challenged them with a question that exposed their hypocrisy. If one of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath, will you not immediately pull it out? This was similar to what he'd said about the woman with the bent back. The point was obvious. They themselves would break Sabbath norms in emergencies involving loved ones or even animals, and they had nothing to say. Once again, the Pharisees were speechless. Jesus' logic was airtight. Human well-being should always take precedence. The 29th miracle is one of the most dramatic and powerful in all of Jesus' ministry. Found in John chapter 11, verses 1 to 44, it tells the extraordinary story of the raising of Lazarus. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Lazarus and his sisters were close friends of Jesus. He often stayed at their home in Bethany, just a couple of miles outside Jerusalem. This, Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. John is referencing an event he'll describe later in chapter 12, where Mary anoints Jesus' feet with expensive perfume. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." Notice what the message said. They didn't ask him to come. They simply informed him of the situation. They trusted Jesus' love for Lazarus and believed he would respond as he saw best. Jesus' reaction was unexpected. When he heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Jesus already knew the outcome. He understood the greater purpose behind Lazarus' illness. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. This deliberate delay seems odd. If Jesus loved them so much, why didn't he go immediately? Because he had something greater in mind. After 2 days, he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." The disciples were concerned. "Rabbi, a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back?" It was dangerous. Judean religious leaders were looking to kill him. Jesus replied with a metaphor about walking in light versus darkness, then said plainly, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up." The disciples misunderstood. "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." So Jesus said it bluntly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas, also called Didymus, said to the other disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." Thomas understood the danger of returning to Judea, but he was willing to follow Jesus, even if it cost him his life. When Jesus arrived, Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Many Jews had come from the city to comfort Martha and Mary. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Martha expressed both her sorrow at Jesus' absence and her faith in his power. Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha thought he was referring to the general resurrection at the end of time. "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus then made one of the most profound declarations in the entire New Testament. "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die." Do you believe this? "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world." Martha's faith was remarkable, even in the midst of deep grief. Martha went back and called her sister Mary aside, saying, "The teacher is here and is asking for you." Mary quickly went to meet Jesus, who had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were comforting Mary saw her leave quickly and followed her, thinking she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." She echoed Martha's words. Perhaps the two sisters had spoken about this during their days of mourning. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Jesus was profoundly affected by their grief. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. The shortest verse in the Bible reveals one of its deepest moments. Even knowing he would raise Lazarus in just a few minutes, Jesus wept. He felt the pain of loss and shared in the sorrow of his friends. His compassion was real and personal. Some of the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But others asked, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave, with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. Martha, ever the practical one, warned, "But Lord, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." In that culture, without modern embalming, decomposition would have already progressed significantly. Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." This prayer shows Jesus' constant communion with the Father and his desire for others to believe. Then Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" Imagine the tense silence, all eyes fixed on the dark entrance of the tomb. And then the dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Lazarus walked out, still bound in his grave clothes. There was no doubt he had truly been dead. The linen wrappings, the stench of decay, the 4 days in the tomb, all confirmed this was a genuine resurrection miracle, not a recovery from a coma or fainting spell. "Take off the grave clothes and let him go," Jesus commanded. What an extraordinary moment it must have been. Sorrow turned into unbelievable joy, tears into laughter, mourning into celebration. The miracle had a profound impact. Many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. But others went to tell the Pharisees, which accelerated the religious leaders' plans to kill Jesus. Ironically, by giving life to Lazarus, Jesus sealed his own death sentence. The 30th miracle of Jesus is recorded in Luke 17:11-19. It's a story that not only showcases Jesus' healing power, but also delivers a deep lesson on gratitude. Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. Jesus was headed to Jerusalem, where he would face crucifixion. This border region was culturally significant. Jews and Samaritans typically avoided each other due to long-standing religious and ethnic tensions. As he entered a village, 10 men, with leprosy met him. They stood at a distance. Leprosy, a term that likely covered a range of skin diseases, not just modern-day Hansen's disease, made a person unclean under Jewish law. Lepers were forced to live outside the community and maintain distance from healthy people. These 10 men were united by shared suffering. Under normal circumstances, Jews and Samaritans wouldn't associate, but their disease had broken down social barriers. Pain and isolation had created a small, suffering community. From afar, they raised their voices and called out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." They recognized Jesus and believed he could help. Calling him Master showed respect for his authority. When he saw them, he said, "Go, show yourselves to the priests." This command aligned with the law of Moses. In Leviticus 14, the law required a healed leper to present himself to the priest, who would examine him and confirm his cleansing, allowing reintegration into society. Interestingly, Jesus didn't say, "You are healed," nor did he touch them as he had done with other lepers earlier in his ministry. Instead, he simply told them to act as if they were already healed, even though there was no visible evidence yet, and it happened that as they went, they were cleansed. The healing happened along the way, not instantly, not in the place where they encountered Jesus. It was a reward for their obedience and faith. They began walking toward the priests while still sick, believing that Jesus could heal them on the way. Picture the scene. As they walked, one of them may have noticed the spots disappearing, dead skin falling away, sensation returning to numb limbs, and then shouts of joy as each one realized they had been completely healed. One of them, when he saw that he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. Out of the 10 healed men, only one came back to express gratitude, and that one was a Samaritan, regarded as heretical and inferior by the Jews. The least expected was the only one to show thankfulness. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Jesus noticed the absence of the others and pointed out the irony. The foreigner showed more gratitude and recognition than those from the covenant people. Then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." The Samaritan received more than just physical healing. The Greek word translated as "made you well" can also mean saved, physically and spiritually. This man received both. His body was cleansed and his soul was saved. This miracle reveals how Jesus broke through social and religious barriers to bring healing and salvation. He healed both Jews and Samaritans without discrimination. It also teaches a powerful lesson about gratitude. Only 1 in 10 return to give thanks. How often do we receive blessings and forget to thank the one who gave them? The 31st miracle of Jesus took place as he was approaching Jerusalem for his final Passover. In Matthew 20, Mark 10, and Luke 18, we find the moving story of the healing of blind men near Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him, says Matthew 20:29. Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem, where he would face the cross. The road passed through Jericho, an ancient city in the Jordan Valley. On the roadside sat 2 blind men. Mark focuses on just one, and even gives his name. Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. Imagine the lives of these men, unable to see, dependent on the charity of others to survive, sitting day after day beside the road, calling out for help from passers-by. When they heard the crowd going by, they asked what was happening. Someone told them, "Jesus of Nazareth is passing by." That name sparked a flame of hope in their hearts. They had heard of his miracles, of the healing he brought. Without hesitation, they began to shout, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." The title, Son of David, was messianic. They were acknowledging Jesus as the promised Messiah. Their faith was remarkable. The crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet, says Matthew 20:31. People thought these blind beggars were being annoying, interrupting the important teacher passing by. But the blind men would not be silenced. They shouted all the louder, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us." They were determined not to miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Even when others tried to shut them down, they cried out even louder. Luke 18:40 says, Jesus stopped and ordered that the man be brought to him. Their persistence caught Jesus' attention. He stopped his journey to answer the desperate call of men whom society had overlooked. When the blind men were brought before him, Jesus asked a simple and direct question. What do you want me to do for you? He wanted to hear it from them, to give them the opportunity to express their faith in a specific way. Lord, we want our eyes to be opened, they replied. A clear, direct request. They knew exactly what they wanted, and they believed Jesus could do it. Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. Immediately they received their sight and followed him. The healing was instant and complete. One moment, they were in total darkness. The next, they could see everything, colors, shapes, faces, the blue sky, green trees, and the face of their Savior. Their response to being healed was powerful. They followed Jesus. They didn't just say thank you and go their own way. In gratitude, they became his followers, joining the crowd on the road to Jerusalem. Luke adds a beautiful detail. He received his sight and followed Jesus, glorifying God. When all the people saw it, they also praised God. This man's public testimony inspired many others to worship and glorify God as well. The 32nd miracle of Jesus is unlike any other. In Matthew 21 and Mark 11, we find the only destructive miracle recorded in the Gospels. Early in the morning, as he was on his way back to the city, Jesus was hungry, says Matthew 21:18. It was the beginning of his final week before the crucifixion. Jesus had spent the night in Bethany, a small village near Jerusalem, and was returning to the city. Seeing a fig tree by the road, he went up to it, but found nothing on it except leaves. Matthew 21:19 continues. Was it fig season? Mark 11:13 says it was not the season for figs. However, the presence of leaves usually meant there would be some early figs. So a leafy tree with no fruit made it a perfect symbol of appearance without substance. Then he said to the tree, "May you never bear fruit again." Immediately the tree withered, Matthew reports. Mark gives a slightly different timeline, stretching the event over 2 days. On the first day, Jesus cursed the fig tree. The next day, passing by the same spot, the disciples noticed it had withered from the roots. The disciples were amazed. How did the fig tree wither so quickly, they asked. This was a different kind of miracle, not a healing or a multiplication, but a judgment. Jesus used the moment to teach about faith and prayer. Truly, I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, "Be lifted up and thrown into the sea," it will happen. And whatever you ask for in prayer, if you believe, you will receive. Why did Jesus curse an innocent tree? This symbolic act was a parable in action. The fig tree represented Israel, specifically its religious leaders, who had all the outward signs of piety, the leaves, but bore no spiritual fruit that God was seeking. Jesus had just cleansed the temple, driving out merchants and money changers, because they had turned the house of prayer into a den of thieves. The curse on the fig tree was directly connected to this judgment on hollow religiosity. The 33rd miracle is the final healing Jesus performed before his crucifixion. In Luke chapter 22, verse 51, we find a brief but significant event. It was nighttime in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus had just prayed intensely, to the point that his sweat became like drops of blood. He knew his time of suffering had come. While he was still speaking, a crowd came up, and the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, says Luke 22:47. This kiss was the prearranged signal to identify Jesus to the guards coming to arrest him. When the disciples realized what was happening, they asked, "Lord, should we strike with our swords?" But before Jesus could answer, one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. John 18:10 gives us more detail. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Peter, always impulsive, tried to defend Jesus with physical force. He was probably aiming for Malchus's head, but ended up cutting off his ear. The situation could have escalated quickly into a full-blown conflict, but Jesus intervened. Enough of this. And then, in a final act of compassion before his arrest, he touched the man's ear and healed him, as Luke 22:51 recounts. This miracle stands out for several reasons. First, it's the only recorded miracle performed during Jesus' arrest. Second, it was done for someone who came to seize him, an enemy, not a follower. Third, it repaired harm caused by one of his own disciples. Even in this critical moment, Jesus demonstrated that his kingdom was not built on violence. "Put your sword back in its place," he told Peter, "for all who draw the sword will die by the sword." This final healing miracle perfectly closed Jesus' earthly ministry. From beginning to end, he showed compassion for all, friends and enemies, Jews and Gentiles, men and women, rich and poor. Even in his darkest hour, while being unjustly arrested, he reached out to heal. The 34th miracle occurred during the crucifixion of Jesus. In Matthew chapter 27, Mark chapter 15, and Luke chapter 23, we read about a supernatural phenomenon that accompanied Jesus' death. Jesus was nailed to the cross around 9 o'clock in the morning, the 3rd hour of the day by Roman reckoning. For 3 hours he suffered as soldiers and passers-by mocked him. Then something extraordinary happened. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land, says Matthew 27:45. From midday, the 6th hour, to 3 p.m., the 9th hour, a mysterious darkness covered the land. This was not a typical solar eclipse. Passover always took place during the full moon, making a solar eclipse astronomically impossible. Besides, a total solar eclipse lasts only a few minutes, not 3 full hours. The darkness was clearly a supernatural event. Its meaning was profound. In the Bible, darkness often symbolizes divine judgment. During the 9th plague in Egypt, darkness covered the land for 3 days. Now, as Jesus bore the sin of the world, a similar darkness fell upon the earth. During those 3 hours, Jesus experienced divine abandonment. Around 3 p.m., he cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Jesus was quoting Psalm 22, a messianic psalm that vividly describes the Messiah's suffering. Soon after this cry, Jesus gave up his spirit. At the moment of his death, the darkness must have lifted, as the gospel accounts describe events people witnessed right afterward. The impact of this miracle was powerful. Luke 23:47-48 says, "The centurion, seeing what had happened, praised God and said, 'Surely this was a righteous man.' When all the people who had gathered to witness this sight saw what took place, they beat their breasts and went away." The Roman centurion, likely a man who had overseen many executions, recognized that this one was different. Matthew records his words as, "Truly, this was the Son of God." The supernatural darkness, along with other signs surrounding Jesus' death, convinced even this Roman soldier of Jesus' divine identity. The 35th miracle happened at the exact moment of Jesus' death. In Matthew chapter 27, Mark chapter 15, and Luke chapter 23, we read about the supernatural tearing of the temple veil. And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit, says Matthew 27:50. At the exact moment of Jesus' death, something astonishing occurred in the temple in Jerusalem, about a kilometer from Golgotha. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. Matthew 27:51 continues, "The temple veil was a massive, thick curtain that separated the holy place from the most holy place, the innermost part of the temple where God's presence symbolically dwelled. This veil was no ordinary curtain. According to the Jewish historian Josephus, the veil in Herod's temple was approximately 60 feet high, 30 feet wide, and as thick as the palm of a hand. It was made of fine fabric and richly embroidered. According to Jewish tradition, it was so heavy that it required 300 priests to handle it. The miracle was not just that this massive veil was torn, but the way in which it happened, from top to bottom. It wasn't torn horizontally, as would be expected if humans had done it. It was ripped vertically, starting at the top, indicating a divine cause, not a human one. The temple veil held profound meaning in the Jewish religious system. It symbolized the separation between God and humanity because of sin. Only the high priest was allowed to pass beyond this veil, and only once a year, on the Day of Atonement, to offer sacrifices for the people's sins. The tearing of this veil, at the moment of Jesus' death, symbolized the end of that separation. Jesus' sacrifice on the cross opened the way for direct access to God. As Hebrews 10:19-20 puts it, "Therefore, brothers and sisters, we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened for us through the veil, that is, his body." This miracle must have caused a great stir among the priests serving in the temple at that time. It happened during the evening sacrifice. So many priests would have been present in the holy place. Imagine their shock as they witnessed the sacred veil tear apart before their very eyes, without explanation. The 36th miracle also occurred at the moment of Jesus' death. In Matthew chapter 27, verses 51-53, we find a striking account of supernatural events. Matthew tells us that at the moment of Jesus' death, in addition to the temple veil being torn, the earth shook. The rock split and the tombs broke open. A powerful earthquake rocked Jerusalem, strong enough to split solid rock. Earthquakes aren't uncommon in the region of Israel, which lies on an active geological fault line. But the timing of this particular quake, coinciding precisely with Jesus' death, clearly suggests this was no ordinary natural event. It was a divine response, the earth itself reacting to the death of its creator. But what happened next was even more extraordinary. Matthew continues, "The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people." This is one of the most intriguing accounts in the entire Bible. People who had died, described as holy, likely meaning faithful followers of God, were raised back to life. Their tombs were opened by the earthquake, but notice they didn't emerge immediately. Matthew specifies that they came out after Jesus' resurrection, suggesting they remained in their graves for about 3 days. After Jesus rose on Sunday morning, these resurrected saints entered Jerusalem, the holy city, and appeared to many. Matthew doesn't tell us who they were, how many there were, or what happened to them afterward. Were they Old Testament figures, recently deceased believers? We don't know. We also don't know whether they received glorified resurrection bodies like Jesus, or if they were temporarily brought back to life, as Lazarus was, only to die again later. Scripture doesn't give those details. What we do know is that this extraordinary event served as a powerful testimony in Jerusalem. Imagine the impact of deceased relatives and friends suddenly reappearing to testify about Jesus' death and resurrection. This miracle, along with the other signs surrounding the crucifixion, convinced many that Jesus was not an ordinary criminal, but truly the Son of God. It's significant that this miracle connected Jesus' death to the resurrection of faithful believers. It was a visible sign of what Jesus' death accomplished, victory over the grave for all who believe in him. As Paul would later write, Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. The resurrection of these saints was a glimpse of the final resurrection that all believers will experience when Christ returns. It was a powerful preview of Jesus' promise. I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. The 37th miracle is the most important of all, the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. This event, recorded in all four Gospels, is the cornerstone of the Christian faith and the ultimate validation of everything Jesus taught and did. After his crucifixion on Friday, Jesus' body was quickly laid in a new tomb belonging to Joseph of Arimathea. A large stone was rolled in front of the entrance, and guards were stationed there by order of Pontius Pilate at the request of the Jewish leaders who feared that Jesus' disciples might try to steal the body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, the women went to the tomb, says Mark 16:2. These women, including Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, were bringing spices to finish the embalming process, which had been rushed on Friday. On the way, they wondered, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb for us? The stone was large and heavy, far beyond their strength. But when they arrived, they were surprised. When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. Matthew 28:2-4 explains what had happened. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and, going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. When the women entered the tomb, they did not find Jesus' body. Instead, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, an angel. He told them, "Do not be afraid. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him." The angel then instructed the women to go and tell the disciples and Peter that Jesus had risen and would meet them in Galilee. The women left trembling and bewildered, but also filled with great joy. What followed was a series of appearances by the risen Jesus, beginning with Mary Magdalene. John 20:11-18 describes how Mary was weeping outside the tomb when Jesus appeared to her. At first, she didn't recognize him, thinking he was the gardener. But when he said her name, Mary, she immediately recognized his voice and exclaimed, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Later that same day, Jesus appeared to two disciples on the road to Emmaus, Luke 24:13-35, and then to the disciples gathered in Jerusalem, except for Thomas, John 20:19-23. A week later, he appeared again, this time with Thomas present, John 20:24-29. Paul summarizes the post-resurrection appearances in 1 Corinthians 15:3-8. Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, was buried, and rose again. On the third day according to the Scriptures, he appeared to Peter, then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 brothers at once, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all he appeared to me also. The resurrection was not like the resuscitation of Lazarus. Jesus didn't simply return to natural life, only to die again later. He rose with a glorified body, a real physical body, but transformed. He could eat and drink, and people could touch him, Luke 24:36-43. But he could also appear and disappear at will and pass through locked doors, John 20:19. The 38th and final miracle recorded in the Gospels happened after Jesus' resurrection. In John 21:1-14, we read about a special encounter between Jesus and 7 of his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, says John 21:1. Tiberias was another name for the Sea of Galilee. Present were Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathanael, the sons of Zebedee, James and John, and 2 other disciples. Peter decided to go back to fishing, his old profession. "I'm going out to fish," he said. The others joined him. "We'll go with you." They went out in the boat, but that night they caught nothing. They had fished all night, the best time to fish in that lake, and caught absolutely nothing. At dawn, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples didn't recognize him. The distance, the early morning light, and possibly even a divine purpose kept them from identifying him right away. Jesus called out, "Children, do you have anything to eat?" "No," they answered. Then he gave them a simple instruction. "Cast the net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. The disciple whom Jesus loved, John, was the first to recognize him. "It's the Lord," he said to Peter. Immediately, Peter jumped into the water and swam to shore to meet Jesus, while the others followed in the boat, dragging the net full of fish behind them. When they arrived, they saw a fire of burning coals with fish on it, and some bread. Jesus had already prepared breakfast for them. "Bring some of the fish you just caught," he said. Peter went and pulled the net ashore. It was full of 153 large fish, but even with so many, the net was not torn. The precise number, 153, suggests that the disciples were so amazed they counted every single one. "Come and have breakfast," Jesus invited them. None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. John notes, this was now the 3rd time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. This final recorded miracle is especially significant for several reasons. First, it echoes the earlier miraculous catch, Luke 5, when Jesus first called these same fishermen to become an incredible journey we've just taken together. We've seen all 38 miracles that Jesus performed during his ministry on earth. From turning water into wine to rising from the dead, each miracle revealed a different aspect of who Jesus truly is. These miracles aren't just ancient stories, they speak directly to our hearts today. They show us a Jesus who cares about weddings and celebrations, who has compassion for the sick and suffering, who feeds the hungry, calms our storms, and holds power even over death itself. If this video touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Hit the subscribe button now so you don't miss our upcoming videos about Bible stories that transform lives. And how about sharing this video with a friend or family member who needs to experience the power of Jesus in their life? Remember, each share can reach someone who needs this message right now. So go ahead, hit that button, spread the word, and let's take the message of Jesus' miracles to the world together. See you in the next video, and may God bless you.